Tottenham are one of only 6 teams never to have been relegated from the top flight of English football during the Premier League era, but that could have been very different were it not for the loan signing of Jurgen Klinsmann midway through the 1997-98 season. Returning to Tottenham 2.5 years after leaving the club, in a bid to get fit in time for the 1998 World Cup, Klinsmann did a little bit more than that. In his final 5 months of professional football, Klinsmann scored 9 goals in just 15 Premier League games, including 4 in a single match against Wimbledon, to keep Spurs in the Premier League. Now Tottenham are one of the Premier League's so-called Big Six. They are the 9th highest earning football club on the planet, and they have arguably the best stadium in the world. Who knows whether all, or indeed any of that would be the case, were it not for Klinsmann's heroic 5-month return. Almost every club has a similar story of a lone saviour who transformed their club's fortunes in both the short, medium and the long term. As a Hull City fan, we have had several, but none more significant than Fraser Campbell, who lit up the Championship on loan from Manchester United and scored 15 goals that fired the Tigers to the top flight of English football for the first time in the history of the club. Alexander Mitrovic, Mate Vidra, and Nathan Tella this season have all made similarly decisive contributions on loan in the Championship. Meanwhile, Kevin Campbell, Christophe Dugarry, and Daniel Sturridge almost single-handedly managed to keep Everton, Birmingham City, and Bolton Wanderers in the Premier League whilst on loan at those clubs. Outside of England, this season alone, Folarin Balogun has scored 22 goals in 39 games on loan at Rennes. Francesco Acerbi became a key cog in Inter Milan's rock-solid backline as they won the Coppa Italia and reached the final of the UEFA Champions League, and Giovanni Simeone's cameo appearances helped Napoli to a first Serie A title in more than 30 years. Clearly then, there have been lots of very impressive loan signings over the years, and the strength of competition is such that not a single one of those examples that I just mentioned made my top 7. With a focus not just on the players who performed best out on loan then, like Kevin De Bruyne at Werder Bremen or Romelu Lukaku at West Bromwich Albion, but on those who made the most significant contributions during their temporary stints, here are, in my view, and in my view only, 7 of the best and most impactful loan moves in the entire history of football. 7th, Johan Gerkhof. What could have been? For those too young to remember Johan Gerkhof in his pomp, it was quite the sight to behold. And never was he in finer vintage than during his single season on loan at Bordeaux. The son of journeyman midfielder turned manager Christian Gerkhof, Johan was considered France's best footballer and tennis player in his age group as a 12-year-old, and he was forced to decide which sport he would pursue. He chose to follow in his father's footsteps, and 2.5 seasons at Rennes was all that it took to spring European giants AC Milan into action. In his first 2 seasons at AC Milan though, as a 19 and 20-year-old, Gerkhof perhaps somewhat unsurprisingly struggled to dislodge Kaká during his prime. That prompted a return to France on loan with Bordeaux in the summer of 2008, who were looking to bring Lyon's run of 7 successive Ligue 1 titles to an end. Aged only 21 still, Gerkhof would prove to be the man to do just that. In one of the most impressive individual campaigns that a midfielder has had in European football over at least the last 20 years, Gerkhof scored 15 goals and made 14 assists, won both the Ligue 1 and French Player of the Year awards, and inspired Bordeaux to the treble. It was Bordeaux's first Ligue 1 title in a decade, and they haven't won one since. Gerkhof's elegance, effectiveness, and sheer presence during the 2008-09 season led to comparisons with Bordeaux and France legend Zinedine Zidane, and hopes that he would be the heir to Zizou in the national team. That sadly wouldn't materialise, not due to a lack of talent, Gerkhof was a genius, but due to a combination of injuries and suggestions that he wasn't always wholly committed or dedicated to the sport. For his contribution in Bordeaux's history-making 2008-09 season, though, which deservedly saw him nominated and receive more votes than both Frank Lampard and Yaya Touré for the 2009 Ballon d'Or, there could hardly be a better candidate to get us started in this seven. 6th, Alvaro Ricoba. Alvaro Ricoba was a brilliant footballer who had an excellent career, but for a 6-month spell on loan at Venezia at the end of the 1990s, he was quite literally one of the best players in the world. Aged only 22 at the time, Ricoba had already lit up the Uruguayan Primera Division with Danubio and Nacional, but he had only made 9 Serie A appearances during a season and a half at Inter Milan. At a time when 4 teams were automatically relegated from Serie A each season, Ricoba joined a Venezia side in danger of being cut adrift at the bottom of the table, and looking like a fairly safe bet to go down. An outstanding technician and set-piece specialist, Ricoba was absolutely inspired in Venice, scoring 10 goals and making 10 assists in only 19 appearances for the club. This is at a time when Serie A was almost universally regarded as being the best league in world football and without doubt the strongest offensively. You wouldn't have known that from the ease with which Ricoba tore the likes of Fiorentina, Roma, Juventus, and indeed his own parent club Inter Milan apart. He pretty much single-handedly kept Venezia up that season with a 4-point cushion by the end of the campaign, having either scored or assisted over half of all of their goals, despite only spending half a season at the club. Ricoba returned to Inter Milan as a superstar, becoming a mainstay in the club's first team for the next 7 seasons. Meanwhile, Venezia were emphatically relegated, with just 26 points won and 30 goals scored, without him the following season. Rubbing salt even further into the wounds, he both scored and assisted as Inter Milan beat the club who helped to launch his European career the first time that he played against them. When Ricoba signed a new deal with Inter in 2002, he briefly became the highest paid player in world football, but despite winning 7 trophies with the Italian Giants and 68 caps for Uruguay, his finest form and most telling contribution of all came during his brief but stunning temporary stint at Venezia. 5th, Thibaut Courtois. Probably a slightly overlooked loan move, partly due to the sheer amount of time that Thibaut Courtois spent on loan at Atletico Madrid. Any objective analysis of his performances and accomplishments in the Spanish capital would result in an inclusion in this 7. Courtois had only spent 1 season in the Genk first team when Chelsea paid €9 million to sign him, and Atletico struck an almost immediate deal to take him on loan. Having just turned 19 at the time, it could have been deemed a risk by a club of Atletico's stature, but Courtois wasn't just any ordinary 19-year-old. Courtois would be replacing a goalkeeper just 1 year his senior in the form of David De Gea, and, just as a side note, Atletico Madrid's track record when it comes to goalkeepers to have gone from De Gea to Courtois to Jan Oblak is pretty exceptional. Back on topic, with De Gea between the sticks, Atletico had conceded 53 goals the previous season. In Courtois' debut campaign, as a 19-year-old no less, they conceded just 46. Courtois went on to spend 3 whole seasons on loan at the Vicente Calderon Stadium, conceding fewer and fewer goals in every passing season. In the 2012-13 season, Courtois let just 31 league goals past him over 38 games, and in his last season in Madrid, he went even better than that, conceding only 26 league goals all season and playing a key role as Atletico won their first La Liga title since 1996. Overall, Courtois made 154 appearances on loan with Atletico Madrid, which is, incidentally, exactly the same number of appearances that he made for Chelsea. He won 4 trophies, including both La Liga and the Europa League. He reached a Champions League final, and he won both the La Liga Goalkeeper of the Season and the Zamora Trophy, the latter of which he won in both of his last 2 seasons. Courtois has since established himself as firmly one of the best goalkeepers of his generation at both Chelsea and Real Madrid, but it was with Atletico that he first forged that reputation in one of the most significant, and indeed just one of the longest, loan spells of all time. Fourth, Fernando Morientes. Not a player who gets an enormous amount of respect here in England at least, most likely due to his short and relatively uninspiring spell at Liverpool. Having been signed with sky-high expectations, Fernando Morientes was Spain's third highest scorer of all time when he won his last cap for the national team, and he led Real Madrid's forward line for over 5 seasons. In the summer of 2003, having lost his place to new signing Ronaldo the previous season, and there is certainly no shame in that, Morientes went on a season-long loan move to Monaco after a proposed move to Schalke had broken down. Monaco had risen from 15th to 2nd the previous season, marking a return to the UEFA Champions League under their promising young manager Didier Deschamps. A brilliant strike partner and excellent at bringing others into the game, Morientes struck up an instant rapport with the giant Croatian Dado Prišo and young Togo international Emmanuel Adebayor. He struck 10 times in 28 games in Ligue 1 as Monaco repeated the feat of qualifying for the Champions League, but it was in Europe's Premier Cup competition that Morientes really came into his own. He scored 9 goals in 12 games to win the Champions League Golden Boot that season, as Monaco were surprise finalists, scoring in both legs of both the quarter and the semi-finals. To add the cherry on top of the icing on top of the cake, Monaco's quarter-final win, in which Morientes scored 2 goals and made 1 assist, came against his parent club and heavy favourites Real Madrid. Overall, Morientes scored 22 goals and made 5 assists on loan at Monaco, inspiring the club to their first and still their only Champions League final, and beating the likes of Thierry Henry, Ruud van Nistelrooy, and his Real Madrid replacement Ronaldo Nazario to win the 2003-04 UEFA Club Forward of the Year award. Not bad going then. Third, Juan Riquelme. The greatest loan player of all time, I would quite confidently state, Juan Riquelme could easily have featured more than once himself in this 7. One of the most naturally gifted and enjoyable midfielders of my lifetime at least, Riquelme was a genius with the ball at his feet, and in full flow, he could make world-class defensive players look worse than mediocre. If you don't believe me, after this video, just go and watch what he did to Claude Makelele when Boca Juniors beat Real Madrid 2-1 in the Intercontinental Cup in the year 2000. It was following 6 seasons in which he made South American football his playground with his beloved Boca Juniors that Riquelme was signed by Barcelona, following in the footsteps of Diego Maradona, with whom he was so frequently compared. Riquelme lacked the speed, dynamism, and sheer explosiveness of El Diego, but none of the skill, guile, or vision. Nonetheless, just like Maradona, his time in Catalonia was not a happy one, and after a single season, in which he clashed with manager Louis van Gaal, he was sent out on loan to Villarreal. The previous season, Villarreal had finished 15th in La Liga, but whilst not everyone might have realised it at the time, they had just signed one of the best midfielders in Europe. Riquelme transformed the Villarreal team virtually overnight, becoming their talisman whether he was deputised on the left, right, or through the middle, as they finished 8th in the league and reached the semi-finals of the UEFA Cup. The following season would be Riquelme's best yet though, or certainly his best in European football at least, as he scored 18 goals from midfield to propel Villarreal all the way up into 3rd, their highest ever La Liga finish, and by some distance. Things soured for Riquelme at Villarreal after he joined the club on a permanent basis, and in 2007, he rejoined Boca Juniors on loan for 5 months. During that time, Riquelme scored 10 goals and made 11 assists in only 26 appearances, carrying Boca to their first Copa Libertadores crown since he had departed. Either could have featured in this 7, and the latter was arguably even more stunning, but it is his longer stint with Villarreal that earns Riquelme a spot in 3rd. Second, Carlos Tevez. Our second successive Argentine, I suspect there are still a lot of people who don't really understand what Manchester United's arrangement with Carlos Tevez was, or indeed his arrangement with West Ham and Manchester City for that matter, but Tevez was technically on loan at Old Trafford from 2007 to 2009. Having very controversially kept West Ham in the Premier League the previous season, having scored the only goal of the game on the final day of the season against Manchester United to secure the Hammers' survival, Tevez's loan fee totalled roughly £10 million plus his wages. In exchange for that, Manchester United got one of the most energetic, tenacious, and dangerous forwards in world football, with a useful penchant for scoring incredibly important goals. Tevez's work-rated industry, along with Wayne Rooney's, both of whom were willing to sacrifice their attacking output, put in the hard yards, and help the team by being more involved in the game all round, allowed Cristiano Ronaldo the freedom to flourish into one of the most devastating forwards in the world. The 2007-08 season was arguably the best team that Alex Ferguson ever assembled, in large part due to that astonishing front three. They won both the Premier League and the Champions League, with Tevez scoring 19 goals and making 7 assists. He was similarly impressive the following season, as the Red Devils won another double but failed to regain the Champions League due to the brilliance of Pep Guardiola's Barcelona team, but there were lingering doubts towards the end of the campaign about Manchester United's ability to keep hold of him. Despite offering Harlem Springs, who owned Tevez's playing rights, the £25.5 million fee that they had initially demanded, and Tevez a contract which would have made him one of the highest earners at the club, Manchester United were blown out of the water by their newly sensationally rich neighbours Manchester City. Manchester City paid a fee now believed to have been €51.25 million, a Premier League record at the time to sign Tevez, and handed him a heavily incentivised contract, which made the Argentine by far the highest paid player in the entire Premier League. First, Edgar Davids. If I were to read you Edgar Davids' stats at FC Barcelona, you probably wouldn't think that he deserved to rank at the top of this 7. So I won't. Nah, I am just kidding, I wouldn't do that to you. After joining Barcelona on loan in January 2004, Davids scored 1 goal and made 1 assist in 20 appearances at the Camp Nou, as Barcelona finished second in La Liga and ended the season trophyless. Of course, the goal and assist statistics are relatively meaningless, since Davids was an incredibly tenacious and explosive defensive midfielder, but the rest is hardly reflective of a more impactful loan move than Riquelme at Villarreal or Tevez at Old Trafford. To put it in its proper context though, Davids joined a Barcelona team which was in crisis. They hadn't finished in the top 3 in any of the last 3 seasons, and yes, that is a crisis at Barca. A 6th place finish the previous season was their joint lowest since the beginning of the 1940s, and they were 7th when Davids arrived halfway through the 2003-04 campaign, a whopping 16 points behind the league leaders Valencia. Davids, who was age 30 at the time, had only made 5 appearances for Juventus in the league so far that season, but had won the Champions League and spent a couple of seasons playing alongside Barca manager Frank Rijkaard at Ajax. Barca had a large Dutch contingent at the time, including Philip Cocu, Michael Reiziger, Patrick Kluivert, Mark Overmars and Giovanni van Bronckhorst, and Davids seemed to give them, and the rest of the Barcelona squad, an enormous lift. On the pitch, his tenacity and doggedness totally transformed Barcelona's midfield and the way in which they were able to approach games. Barca didn't lose a single one of Davids' first 15 La Liga appearances, including a 2-1 win at the Santiago Bernabeu in El Clasico, having been dreadful prior to his arrival. Davids never signed for Barca, instead joining Inter Milan, which turned out to be a pretty big mistake, but in 5 months in Catalonia, he changed the whole feel and trajectory of the club. The following season, Barca won the La Liga title. The season after that, they won the UEFA Champions League. And then came the Pep Guardiola era of 2008 to 2012, the most dominant in the history of the club, and still considered by many to be the best team that the sport has ever seen. Without Edgar Davids' half-season on loan at Barcelona, which took the team from 7th in La Liga to 2nd, whilst impossible to ever truly know, it seems improbable to me at least that all of that would have happened, or at least not in the way that it ended up panning out. For that reason, and I hope that you agree that it is a quite compelling one, he takes my top spot. There are countless other outstanding loan moves, aside from those that I mentioned in the introduction, whether that be Jesse Lingard at West Ham, Joe Willock at Newcastle United, Fabrizio Micli at Benfica, Toni Kroos at Bayer Leverkusen, or Juan Sebastian Veron at Inter Milan, and it was tough to whittle them down to 7, admittedly. There are tougher jobs out there, like working on an oil rig or being in charge of cover-ups at the Vatican, but you get the idea. Tough nonetheless. Hopefully you enjoyed today's video though, whether you agree with my selections or not. If that was the case, please consider hitting the like button. Apparently it is helpful in some way, shape or form. Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments, and of course, make sure that you're subscribed and have notifications turned on for both this channel and my second channel, Alfie Potsama, both of which should be on your screens or about to appear on your screens now, along with a couple of videos that you might fancy watching after this one. You can also find me on Twitter or on Instagram via the username @HITC Sevens, should you wish to do so.